Welcome to Adventures in TV Land. For this video, we're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going to check out the birthplace where the Declaration of Independence was signed, Independence Hall, here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So let's go and check it out.
So my day begins in a parking garage. Yo, we're 250, bro. This monument here was presented on the centennial of the United States, so in 1876. It's dedicated to religious liberty, First Amendment. Here's another monument to the First Amendment. There she is, Independence Hall. Now, the tour Independence Hall, you have to get tickets ahead of time. They cost $1. You have to get them the day before, and they sell out very quickly. You have to get them like at 5 p.m. online. That's the only way you can do it.
So this here was the Pennsylvania State House originally, built between 1732 and 1753. The name Independence Hall comes from the 1820s as a nickname. At the time, it was a public meeting house and even the first museum in the United States. By 1854, the building is Philadelphia's City Hall, and by 1948, the National Park Service has taken over and begins restoration to put the building back as closely as possible to what it would have looked like originally, to Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. This was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, one of the three branches of the colonial government. It operated on the model of the English system, which is very similar now to our American system. Trials were public. You're standing in the public gallery. We're trial by jury, and the grand jury consider the evidence. If an indictment is reached, a 12-man trial jury will be handled. The defendant is not guilty until proven guilty, but is confined to the non-murder trial. They have certain rights to protect them, including, of course, a public trial, jury trial, but also to confront their accuser, to hire an attorney, to have a speedy trial, and most importantly, the presumption of not guilty until proven guilty. These are, in fact, about a third of the issues listed in the Declaration of Independence, ultimately. Reasons for breaking away, because these long-established and closely held British rights are being ignored or violated. Restrict these rights of legislation and of the operation of the courts. It's in response to several things outside of North America: the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian Wars, the expanding British Empire, and for North America itself, the fact that American colonists pay next to nothing taxes, refuse to pay any more taxes, and will demand they have the right to expand into the western frontiers without Parliament's interference. American colonists are getting a little ahead of themselves, but it's partially Parliament's fault because they let us have for nearly a century. And only now they're trying to enforce existing and new laws. There's pushback, there's protest. There's, of course, that phrase, no taxation without representation. There's also assaults on tax collectors, the famous tarring and feathering. There are protests and boycotts. And there are acts of violence. You've heard of the Boston Massacre? That started with a protest. It devolved into a riot and ended with a shooting, and the most controversial court case of the time. John Adams defends the British soldiers accused of murder because he feels everyone's entitled to a fair trial. It's one of those pivotal moments because despite that, in fact, those British soldiers were found not guilty, Parliament still steps in and refuses to allow any of its officers or officials to be tried in colonial courts. Imagine that. Local jurisdiction is ended. Someone commits a felony in your hometown. You expect that you're going to get justice if they face trial maybe 3,000 miles away, if the government that deployed them even bothers to charge them. By 1774, Massachusetts had enough. They had demonstrated repeatedly, beginning to form militias, and you have the most famous event pre-revolution, Boston Tea Party. It's an economic protest, but it's also sending a message. Parliament can pass whatever law at once. We're not going to follow. What's more, we are going to deliberately destroy government property. Parliament responds with another escalation. If you're not going to respect the rule of law, we are going to declare martial law. The courts, the legislature, and the civilian governor are all removed or suspended. Boston is placed under military occupation, and Massachusetts no longer has a colonial charter to structure a civilian government. It's been rescinded. The other colonies see this as a direct threat. This can happen in Massachusetts for such a petty reason as, say, a tea party. What's going to stop it from happening in Pennsylvania, Virginia, or South Carolina? And that is why they first decided to meet here in Philadelphia as the Continental Congress to discuss ways they can work together to protect immigrants. The Second Continental Congress is scheduled to take place in May of 1775. It's going to see what results their collective actions or boycotts and protests have gained. But there's an unexpected development. April 19, 1775, Battle of Lexington and Concord. This is an escalation. This is the first time there's actually a military confrontation between the militias and the King's Army. And now we got to determine what the next steps are in the room where it was all. This right here is where the Pennsylvania legislature met until May 1775. They'll move upstairs at the Continental Congress and take the room. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they'll all be here. And they will be discussing, in some cases arguing. There's a very sharp north-south divide. All the attention, all the fighting has been in Massachusetts. The southern colonies resent that they're being dragged into something not of their choosing. Much more, a war that no one can hope to win against the most powerful military empire. So they're very much in favor of a peaceful resolution, which of course frustrates New England, particularly John Adams, because he sees his fellow countrymen fighting and dying for all of our rights without any support. So there's a lot of back and forth there. There are some exceptions. Virginia agrees fundamentally with Massachusetts' position. It is the largest and the strongest and the richest of the colonies. So John Adams does a little bit of political maneuvering. He nominates George Washington to be commander-in-chief of the new combined military. It gives the South a leadership role, it unites, and it also has a practical application. Washington is the only one who has any real military command experience, so the job should go to him. Diplomacy was attempted, but it failed. The king does not recognize the legitimacy of his body and will not even open their correspondence. Furthermore, as the fighting escalates, Bunker Hill, he will declare that the colonies are in a state of active rebellion, these men are traitors and enemy of the state. Thomas Paine, another Englishman, writes to the American public that being branded as traitors is not the worst thing in the world because it reinforces something that we already did. One, we can and should govern ourselves. We've been doing this essentially for the past 100 years. Take it to the next logical step. Common Sense is published here in Philadelphia in January of 1776. It's what builds the popular support for the idea of independence, for government without monarchy, for government that respects and recognizes natural rights. In June of 1776, you're going to see the Virginia delegation bring the matter to a vote. Richard Henry Lee delivers a motion. Be it resolved that these United Colonies are, and right ought to be, free and independent states. But the vote stalls. 7 delegations are willing to commit to this, 5 are not. And while technically that's enough for the resolution to pass, it's preferred to have all 13 colonies on board. The vote will be delayed until the following month. We'll take up the issue again on July 1st. That gives those with their reservations time to be heard, and maybe even convince a few who are opposed to independence to support them. It's thought that we should also have a press release, a public statement explaining our decision, justifying it. A committee is established. In fact, this is the day, the anniversary that the Committee of 5 is tasked with drafting a Declaration of Independence. Anyone here work on a committee or work group? School, office? How does it usually go?
Not well.
One person does most of the work, 2 people kind of help, a few others are on the committee who don't do anything. That was the Committee of 5 for the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson is going to be the primary author, and again, that's a decision that we credit to John Adams. John Adams admits that he's not well liked, he's often seen as distrusted or even obnoxious, and Mr. Jefferson is not a no person, not a nobody, but he hasn't really drawn much attention to himself. But being a Virginian, having the voice of independence coming from Virginia is a way to make it more palatable to the other members. Benjamin Franklin was a newspaper editor and printer, so it's key for him to assist in the composition and the styling of the Declaration, but it's mostly going to be Jefferson's work. On June 28th, the committee decides the Declaration is completed, it's submitted to Congress. They will review it lightly, but set it aside because there's no point in approving a Declaration of Independence until it looks scary. The original Independence Day was the day that the Lee Resolution was approved, July 2nd. John Adams said it would go down forever in history, celebrated with acts of solemnation, of remembrance, of games and sport and guns and illuminations and feasts from one corner of the continent to the other forevermore. Sound familiar? Sounds like Independence Day, but he got the date wrong. July 2nd may be the official decision, but July 4th is when the decision is presented to the public. There are 2 days of editing and censorship that go into the Declaration of Independence. The most controversial aspects that Jefferson included, his critique of slavery, are actually removed entirely because they are seen as too divisive and too off-topic. Instead, you have, you can call it a sanitized version. It's somewhat condensed too. There's actually some redundant wording in the Declaration that didn't actually need to be there, at least according to Congress. But July 4th is the date that it will be published. Mention I said written, composed, published. What did I not say about the Declaration? What didn't happen on July 4th? It was not signed. It was not signed. That's confusing because if you look at the Declaration of Independence printed on July 4th, at the very bottom it does say, signed by order. John Hancock. The actual signing of the formal declaration was August 2nd, but we still keep the original effective date. But for July 4th, this is the Declaration of Independence. There are 26 that we know that still survive. One's down the street in the issue of the American Revolution. 2 are in London. They didn't get very good reception when they arrived there. One was found in a picture frame in Gettysburg and sold for $8 million. And we sell them for $5 each year. We do have an original one here that will go on display just in time for July 4th. But this is 1,500 words, a 10-minute read, the key points of the American Revolution, the 2 major philosophical ideas, popular sovereignty and natural rights. Life, liberty, and property, John Locke wrote 130 years earlier, is now life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as expanded by Thomas Jefferson. People have a right to institute government, and they are the ones to determine its legitimacy. They sum it up. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government. There are 27 reasons why the British government has failed in this role, why they are incapable and not to be trusted with the powers of government. Beginning, interestingly enough, not with taxation without representation, that's actually at the bottom, but of these 2 rules. In fact, the first one, he, regarding the king, has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Saying that the king is declaring himself to be above the law and refusing to submit to what is established by the legislature as the proper law. There's some other interesting things too. Denying us the right of trial by jury. I mentioned that room how important this was to them. Most of these men were lawyers, and they see that fundamentally, no government, no law can stand without a due respect for the law. The very bottom of the Declaration of Independence is an explanation. We've tried everything else. We spent the past 13 years trying to work within the system, but ultimately, the only way to move forward is separate. They understand the risks they're taking, even say, being pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, because at the very least, they're risking arrest and confiscation of property, and at most, the hanging's noose. And this comes probably at the worst time to declare independence because we have no money, no allies, no navy, and no real army, and the British are coming. They invade New York City and capture it. Washington is forced to retreat. The next year they capture Philadelphia. Finally, in 1779, the French agreed to commit to an alliance, which breathes new life into the war effort. It allows us to win crucial victories, to have money and material to actually fight the war, but also political recognition that the 13 American states are independent nations. Spain and the Netherlands come on board, providing money, weapons, political recognition. In my 1781, the decisive battle at Yorktown almost guarantees American independence. 1783 brings us to the conclusion of the war with the Treaty of Paris, recognition of the 13 United States as free and independent from Britain, and then the real war begins, that of nation building. The states have drafted their constitutions, they've organized themselves in a firm league of friendship, and it all fell apart after the war concluded. Because the only thing truly uniting them was a common enemy. None of the enemies no longer a factor. All their prejudices and problems and rivalries from before are compounded with the fact that they're broke. They fought the war in credit. They disagree on who owes what to whom and who owns what territory on the western frontier. You ever heard of the Pennsylvania and Connecticut War? What happened after the Revolution? It's a long example of conflicts between the colonies. Pennsylvanians and Maryland's went to war in 1723. I don't know what it is, but apparently people don't like my hometown of Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. Keep on trying to invade it. Regardless, what's the issue? There's no leadership. There's no president of the United States at this time. There's no national court system that's going to settle disputes between the states because the states here don't trust centralized power. They saw what happened when a king becomes tyrannical. They don't particularly like each other. They don't want one state to tell another state to do. So they feel that this balance of no one in charge is the best way forward. You probably might change your mind. In fact, these men start to when an armed group of Pennsylvania soldiers who hadn't been paid surround this building and refuse to allow the Congress to leave. That's also why Philadelphia is not the capital of the United States. This goes on for 4 years. New York, Massachusetts, there are riots, there are rebellions, there are threats of wars between the states, and finally there is a solution that is envisioned in this room beginning in May of 1787. The convention is organized between the states to draft a binding constitution. Now initially they were only going to try to shore up the friendship. Once that became obvious that it wouldn't work, they switched gears. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton being present, forming the architecture of this new political system. Benjamin Franklin, respected elder statesman, is a voice of moderation and compromise. George Washington is a symbol of leadership. Originally Virginia delegate, he's given the task of the president of this convention, sitting in that very chair. Number 4, very hot and humid Philadelphia months, much like today. About 40 men will hammer out a compromise for a three-branch system of government at a national level. The executive, indirectly elected every 4 years. A president, or as Mr. Washington put it, Mr. President and nothing more. A single president was the compromise for a 4-year term. Everything you can imagine was thrown into the idea basket. Maybe have 3 presidents at once. They'll decide policy by a vote of 2. Maybe have a single president, but only for 1 year. Or maybe 10 years. Or perhaps a lifetime appointment based on good behavior. A 4-year indirect elected president was the compromise. Legislative powers are split between very different models. Large states insist on proportionality. More people, more voices, more votes. Our House of Representatives. Those who feel now is the time to move forward. One man, one vote. Sorry, ladies. That will be the House of Representatives, the only one that's directly elected. The Senate will be the voice of the states. The states are equal in the Union. The states will have equal representation. 2 senators per state, appointed by the state government, not elected originally. An independent court system, overseen by a Supreme Court of the United States to work out differences in opinions, to interpret this Constitution, and to hopefully strike a careful balance between the other 2 branches. That is 4 pages, 4,500 words. It's a good start, but there's going to be additions that are required. An amendment process by design is included. James Madison thinks about 20 additions, 20 amendments would be a good start. That's pared down to 12, 10 of which are ratified in 1791, our Bill of Rights. That begins an ongoing process to this day to expand the vision from this room, 4-page document, to our current republic. It sees the end of slavery following the Civil War, the recognition that all American citizens, regardless of race or sex or even age, have the right to vote. These are incremental improvements that continue the work that has begun here by 40 men at the end of the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin recognizes this is a good foundational start. He has guarded optimism for what's been achieved here. September 17, 1787, he is one of 39 signers of this Constitution, and he reflects on the moment. He noticed a symbol that was in the room then, that's still here today, the top of George Washington's chair, an ornament carved in the woodwork. A half-sun, still rising, still forming, with 13 rays of light, crowned by a liberty cap, symbol of a new beginning for this new American government he envisions. During the long course of the sessions, he will say, I had often looked at that which appeared above the president, unable to decide whether it were a rising or a setting sun, but at length had the happiness to know at last it is indeed a rising, and not a setting sun. Dr. Franklin has a guarded optimism, but he's also a realist. He understands this will be a challenge for future generations, and he delivers them a typical Franklin, a warning. You have a republic, he says, if you can keep it.
That chair was George Washington's chair when he was president of the Constitutional Convention. This tablet here is dedicated to the prisoners of war who were held here at Independence Hall by the British occupation in 1777 and through 1778.
I can only summarize all of that by saying it was thrilling to be in the room where it happened. I mean, literally, the room where it happened.
And now we are in Congress Hall, where Congress met from 1790 through 1800.
In the 1730s, 40s, and 50s to serve as the seat of government for the colony of Pennsylvania. And it happened to be the room where the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution were signed. This building did not exist. In fact, as they started writing the Constitution, ground was broken for this building. It was constructed to be a county courthouse. And the Constitution, it takes them 4 months to write it, and then copies are sent to the states, and they wait for 3/4 of the states to ratify it, and it happens the next year. And once the Constitution was ratified, then the elections were held. And then the first Congress under the new Constitution met where the old Congress had met last, and that was New York City. And then the question was, is this Constitution going to work? Is it going to make a more perfect union? If it works, will the people accept it as the law of the land? Will it create a stronger union? And those first 10 years are big tests. And we're still using that same Constitution down on the Potomac, known as District of Columbia. So the first floor was down for the House of Representatives, and upstairs was the Senate. Now, you were sitting in the House after the first census was conducted, because once they counted everybody, they found they needed to add 40 more seats. And so this building was enlarged so that the House of Representatives could fit. And this is what it looked like. We used this sketch from Philip Van Cortlandt, New York representative here in 1795. He wrote down everybody was sitting. It's like a snapshot. Actually,
Not that.
well, of course.
And I understand the alliance of France.
Oh, yes, we wouldn't be here without
Sure, I
France,
get that.
Spain, the Dutch. Remember, each house has its primary responsibilities, but they both can write bills that can become laws. And that's why we have committee room, because have you guys ever worked in a big group to accomplish one thing? What's it? Or a small group, which works out better? That woman in there. And that woman has a book in her hands, and this one has a party dress. Yeah. And who was this woman? And allows this troublesome young French man to stay and become an American.
Huh.
So that's Citizen Janae.
World Heritage Sites. The East Wing is now the gift shop. There's an original copy of Common Sense by Thomas Paine. The Deceiver Unmasked was a rebuttal to Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Richard Henry Lee.
If you look real closely, particularly over here in these core areas, you'll see that they're literally tapering and starting from back on.
This is the chair Thomas Jefferson sat at when he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
I looked at it, I don't remember the particulars of it, but it was went on auction somehow or for sale.
If you've liked this video, hit that like button. If you disliked, hit the dislike button. Subscribe to my channel for further content and ring that bell for email notifications. And if there's someplace that you would like to see me visit, or you have a suggestion about some future video you'd like to see me do, leave a comment in the comment section. And if you've enjoyed this video, or any of the adventures in TV land, you could help support this channel by going to either buy me a coffee or a Patreon or even here on YouTube and making a donation or becoming a member at any of those places. This has been another adventure in TV land. I thank you for watching. Until next time, that's a wrap.